If you cringed a little when you saw that today's topic was pork, you're not alone. Pork gets a bad rap, but is it really guilty as charged? Is it packed with cholesterol? Is it unhealthy compared to chicken? And do patients have to avoid it altogether if they have heart disease? I learned so much in this episode, like why pork is classified as a red meat, the correct cooking temperature, and in case you didn't know, it should have a pink center, and why our American farmers deserve a whole lot more love than they get. So today I'm sitting down with a pork expert to unpack the facts. And trust me, you're going to walk away with a whole new perspective on pork. I'm Colleen, a PA, dietitian, and your nutrition mentor. Welcome to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. My guest is Dr. Kristen Hicks-Roof, a registered dietitian, director of human nutrition at the National Pork Board, and a nationally respected voice on evidence-based nutrition. In this episode, you'll learn why lean cuts of pork, like pork tenderloin, are just as heart healthy as chicken, and how to confidently recommend them to your cardiac patients. How pork stacks up against other protein sources when it comes to protein and micronutrients. We talk about the most common mistakes people make when cooking pork and how to fix it so it's full of flavor. And what you really need to know about pork's role in sustainability, animal welfare, and global food security. 3 topics that are very important to me, my patients, and I'm sure to you as well. So if you've ever felt uneasy recommending pork, or you're ready to add another great option to your nutrition toolbox, you're going to love this episode. So thanks for bringing me along on your walk, your commute, or whatever part of the day you've carved out for this. I hope this conversation with Kristen leaves you informed, encouraged, and ready to help your patients with confidence. Kristen, welcome back to the show. I am so excited to have you back. You are actually my episode 50 that aired last year, and we actually talked about what exactly is a dietitian, and you helped us understand how dietitians play a role on the medical team, how we can refer to them. So if you guys want to check out that episode after you listen to this one, it is a really, really helpful episode. So Kristen, thank you so much for being here.
I am so happy to be back and really talk about a different topic in a different area of my life as well.
Exactly. Yes. There's a lot of opinion about pork. But before we get into the meat of today's topic, can you just share a little bit about yourself with my audience?
Yes. So I will disclaim, and I'm very transparent, and you'll see throughout this, I am the director of human nutrition at the National Pork Board. And in my role, I oversee all of our investments in human nutrition research and then research communications. What we do at the National Pork Board is research, education, and promotion. And so that's really what I'm here to talk about, is the facts of what we know with evidence-based practice.
I love your transparency and I appreciate that. And I promise you guys, I will never bring anyone on here who has ulterior motives or anything like that, who's trying to sell you something. I really want to get down to the evidence so that we can present that clearly and confidently to our patients. And so let's unpack pork because there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. I actually posted a poll on LinkedIn kind of teasing this topic, and I got a wide range of opinions about pork. So I can't wait to dig into what the research actually says and how we can share that with our patients. So one of the biggest myths that I hear is that pork is not a healthy protein choice. And so could you just break down the nutrition profile of lean pork and then how that compares to other proteins, maybe like chicken or beef, that we more commonly recommend?
It was so cool that you posted that to really engage your audience and figure out what do they know and what do they want to know or maybe not know. I want to start out with people choose food because of taste and flavor. You can look at every year of the International Informational Report and people choose food for taste and flavor. So know that that's where pork wins. Pork wins in taste and flavor, and we see it over and over. In fact, we had a research study last year that looked at pork and flavor conducted by Sensory Science. And pork has over 110 flavor nuances. And I think that's really interesting because as health professionals, we want to meet our audience where they're at while being the expert in nutrition to really help improve their nutritional profile of their meal. So I think if we think about the flavor piece, which is why people want it, how do we balance that So let me talk a little bit about pork and its nutritional profile. Number one, fresh pork has over 20 grams of protein per 3-ounce serving. For those of you who don't know a serving is about the palm of your hands or a deck of cards or whatever visual you like to use in today's society. But a 3-ounce serving has 20 plus grams of protein, which is pretty incredible of providing that much protein for a small quantity, which is going to play a key role in those individuals who don't have large food consumptions. Secondly, pork has 8 cuts that are lean cuts considered by the USDA definition. In fact, 3 of those are American Heart Association certified: your sirloin pork chop, your sirloin pork roast, and your pork tenderloin. So when people throw around the idea of pork and nutrition, they're maybe uncertain, but I will tell you, pork is a cut for everyone. Well, yes, we have our processed portfolio with bacon and sausage, which people love with flavor. We also have the lean cuts. So we developed a handout last year, and we looked at all of the lean ground cuts that you would find in the meat case, right? Your pork, your beef, your chicken, your turkey, and your plant-based products. And when you compare across all the lean ground products that you can find in the meat case, pork, lean ground pork, so 96% lean ground pork, has 26 grams of protein, is lower in calories, total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol across the board. The pork tenderloin, which is the leanest cut of pork, it's actually 3 grams of fat, which is the same as boneless, skinless chicken breast. But let's take a 3-ounce cut of pork tenderloin. It has 122 calories, 22 grams of protein specific to the tenderloin. That provides nearly 3 times the amount of protein for the same amount of calories. So 130 grams or a half a cup of black beans is 118 calories for 8 grams of protein. In addition, when you look at the micronutrient profile, which a lot of people don't ever think about the micronutrients in animal protein, but like that is one of the shining stars beyond protein. Pork shines in selenium, your B vitamins like thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, vitamin B6, and choline. So I think there is a role for all foods, right? And there's a role for all proteins as well. I think it's a combination, it's a synergy of plant and animal. And I think we need to understand our audience and provide them choice, because that's what they're looking for as health professionals, whether it's food insecurity or let's say infants, adolescents, elderly, people who aren't eating high quantities of food. How do we optimize the density of the food so that way we're helping them meet their nutritional needs with smaller quantity?
That's a key word right there, is optimize, right? We have to work with the patients with where they are. And I think that pork could be a really good option there. Now, you mentioned that some cuts of pork can fit into a heart healthy diet. So I wanted to linger here a little bit, because this was also a really common misunderstanding, is that people assume that pork is always higher in fat and cholesterol. And so can you just remind us, I know you mentioned it before, but let us know, what are the leanest cuts of meat and how can we explain that to our cardiac patients that it could still fit into a heart healthy diet?
So there's 8 lean cuts, and we do have a great handout on our Pork and Partners community, which is our health professional community. I'll also provide the link for you. And it talks about the 8 lean cuts. In particular, the 3 most common that you'd see in the retailer that people eat is the sirloin pork chop, the sirloin pork roast, and the pork tenderloin. And then you do have, depending on the retailer, you might have a lean or extra lean ground pork. It all depends on the grocery store you shop at. But we do have a 96% lean ground pork. And that is such a wonderful option. It's economical and it's a different flavor as some of your other ground products. And so I always like, what we personally do here in our kitchen is we do a pork and beef blend. We do a 50-50 blend. And, as dietitians, we're always thinking about how do we have variety and versatility in that. But fun fact here, the most common fat in the cuts of pork is monounsaturated fat. So a lot of people think, oh, pork is solely saturated fat. It may not be good for you. And in fact, that's not true. The most abundant fat in pork is monounsaturated fat. The same fat that you would find in a lot of heart healthy dietary patterns, right? Whether it's DASH or Mediterranean, a lot of what we talk about in our Pork and Partners community, and really all the research that you're seeing, is on food patterns, right? Like how people eat foods in context of other foods, because no one is only eating one food, right? And we really talk about pork and plants. And we talk about pork and plants because that's really what people are eating. And that's what we want to optimize. So whether it's maybe your processed cut. So one example is, food service operations about 10 years ago never had Brussels sprouts on the menu. Now all of a sudden you see Brussels sprouts with what? You see it with bacon, right? And I'm not saying you need a surplus of these proteins. It's everything in moderation, but you add that flavor vehicle and that helps people get more plants in their diet, right? Or like if they're grilling outside and maybe they're grilling chop. What if you use that chop or another cut and you made skewers with vegetables and pork? And so I think that's really our role as health professionals is how do we get them to add the fruit and vegetable with the flavors and foods that they love? And I think if we have that approach, it will help to really support the heart health, but support health in general.
Quick reminder, if you love this podcast, you will love my weekly newsletter where I share nutrition tips and keep you up to date on the latest guidelines. You can sign up completely for free at examroomnutrition.com/sign up, and the link will be down below in the show notes. Okay, I want to linger here a little bit because you're giving us some really, really helpful tips for pork preparation. And I feel like that's a big hindrance to a lot of families cooking in general, right? We know a lot more people don't know how to cook or make foods that actually taste good. And so that's a big hindrance, but especially with pork, like not a lot of people know different cooking techniques and maybe like you were talking about like combinations with things. So what are some other suggestions about how providers can help patients gain confidence in actually preparing it in a healthy way? What are some of your tips that you've found to incorporate pork in their diet?
Well, Colleen, you and I know each other pretty well in the sense of we're both working moms, right? And I know many individuals out there are working families. And so what we talk about a lot, and even our sensory science shows, the pork tenderloin in the air fryer had the juiciest, most flavorful profile out of every cut and every cooking method. So while yes, we think as dietitians, oh, it's a lean cooking method because you don't really add a fat to it. It's also the research is showing, wow, you're really embracing the flavors in there. So that's something I want to investigate more on the research side of it. So I think air fryer is a great preparation. You can put chops, you can put the tenderloin, which is one of our favorites. We also use, grill or smoker. That's a great option if you are out barbecuing on the weekends. But I did want to say, one of the errors, maybe you could say, is when cooking pork is people overcook pork. And then it's like a leathery wallet almost. It's almost hard to eat. And you see it at home. You see it in food service operations. I mean, it's very abundant, unfortunately. About 10 years ago, the National Pork Board provided ample evidence to USDA and actually changed the cooking temperature from 160 to 145 with a 3-minute rest. And so if, in fact, people cook their fresh pork cuts to 145 with a 3-minute rest, you're actually going to get this rosy pink center. And this is going to tie into some of our other questions, but is rosy pink center scary? Should I be worried about that? No, we should not be worried about that. Pork is in fact a red meat by USDA definition. And so we actually do want a rosy pink center at the 145 with a 3-minute rest. That's when you're going to get the most flavor and juiciness and tenderness, just as you would with some of your other animal proteins that you would cook with that kind of medium rare, medium kind of look.
That is so interesting. It's funny because we're a little bit like turned off by thinking like meat should be pink. I think because chicken, right? We automatically kind of equate pork and chicken because they're both sort of like the like lighter in color. If I see chicken that's pink, I'm like, oh, no, get that away from me. But pork, on the other hand, should be that rosy pink. So it's so interesting. I think that's an important education piece, especially like you had said, to improve the flavor and the texture of that cut of meat. And it's interesting that you use that pink word. My daughter, I asked her one night, and this is when she was much younger. She's probably like 4 or 5. And I'm like, what do you want to have for dinner? And she goes, oh, make that pink chicken again. I really liked that. And I laughed and I'm like, oh my gosh, what pink chicken? And I remembered it was pork tenderloin. And so really, really great point is that a 4 or 5-year-old enjoyed the quote pink chicken because it was really, really flavorful.
Yeah, and it really all stems from the 1980s campaign actually launched by the National Pork Board as pork the other white meat. And while there was a lot of success with that marketing campaign, I can't tell you the amount of health professionals and scientists that we still run into today that think pork is a white meat, which is very valid that they have that thought. That marketing campaign did such a great job. But pork is not, in fact, a white meat. It is like a pink meat. The USDA classifies whether it's a red or a white meat based on the amount of myoglobin content in the meat. That's the only selection criteria. And so the percentage of myoglobin content make pork and beef red meats and lamb versus your white meat, which is going to be your poultry and chicken.
Okay, I'm learning so much from you. I fell prey to that campaign, pork the other white meat, because I think that's where we associate chicken and pork. They should be cooked at the same temperature. Fascinating that pork is considered a red meat. I don't know if a lot of you knew that, but that is how it's classified. And I love that you explained that it's the amount of myoglobin that's in the meat. So fascinating. So from a nutrition and a health perspective, what do we need to know or maybe share with our patients about this classification? Like, why does that matter?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the research, I think, is continuing to unpack on this. I'll be honest, like for us at the National Pork Board, a lot of the research that we've seen out in the literature really lumps all red meat together. And so it's truly hard to understand pork's role in human health. So we have invested in over $1 million of research funding year over year since 2022 to truly understand pork's role in human health versus the entire lumping. So I think that is an important point, that over the next 3 to 4 years, because for those of you who are in nutrition research or follow research, from the day of study of funding to the final results could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But I think we'll really start to understand a better comprehensive view of pork in health. Now, red meat often gets the demonization, and a lot of that is related to epidemiology studies, looking at correlation. Yet when you boil down to the evidence and you're actually looking at randomized controlled trials, and we have a number of them, I'll provide you with several references here. If you look at the randomized controlled trials, you can see that pork, when part of a nutritious dietary pattern, which is what it should be, you don't see the increased risk. You actually see an improved microbiome profile. You see some improved cardiometabolic markers. And so I think we need to continue to unpack the nutrition research. What is it? Is it the confounding factors? Is it what we're eating with these red meat foods? Or is it the red meat? And so I think you're going to continue to see more research on that. But I'm going to defend red meat here because you don't often see that, right? You see the opposite of defending. Let me tell you, red meat in general, including pork, is a high quality protein, right? And we talked about that. It also has critical micronutrients, which if you look at dietary guidelines and the nutrient gaps, you see that there are major nutrient gaps, things like zinc, vitamin B12, iron. All of those found in pork and red meat, right? But you also see that this is happening across the life stage. We have these key micronutrient gaps in infancy, in toddlerhood, in childhood, in pregnancy, lactation, and older adulthood. So, red meat has something to offer, but I think it's in moderation, it's in balance, and it's part of a nutritious diet. And that's where, if we can go that direction as health professionals of all foods fit, plants and animals work together, I think that's where the evidence is showing. And we could talk about balance, and we could talk about a nutritious dietary pattern, because that's what the evidence shows.
I feel like one of the biggest things that people poo-poo about pork is they kind of veer towards the processed pork foods, or those that are, covered in sauce. So I'm thinking bacon, sausage, or your ribs, your pulled pork sandwiches. Those often dominate the conversation about pork. And I think that's where a lot of the negativity comes, because there are some negative health outcomes with the processed meats. So I'm just curious your thoughts on how we can educate patients about healthier ways to include pork in their diet, and how we can answer some of those questions about the processed meats.
I will say, and it goes back to earlier, people choose food for flavor. And, whether you like it or not, those bacon, sausages, other cuts, people choose them because of flavor. And so what we can do is we can encourage, if you love that flavor, how can we bring them into the wider portfolio? Maybe looking at some of those lean cuts and say, hey, if you like this flavor, look, you can get similar flavor at a leaner choice, right? And so I think you can transform people further into the category. So I think that is one option. Two, like I said, how do we use what people are already eating and complement it? I think so often it's remove and replace. And yeah, that sounds great in theory, but if people told me to take ice cream out of your diet, I would lose my mind because I love ice cream. Now, what I can do is I can reduce my portion size. I can add berries to complement it. So I think it's not remove and replace, but I think it's transition, and it's also moderation and balance. So if you're going to have, some bacon and sausage with your breakfast, which again, people are choosing with flavor, can you add some kale or spinach or eggs? And can you make a little frittata or something like that with it? Right. So I think we're going to be more successful than telling people to eliminate because they get scared. And fear tactics scare people a lot of foods. I mean, look at the internet. You can find every food to be scared against. I mean, you can find unwashed fruits and vegetables to be scared against. My goodness. And so let's remove the food fear and let's talk about, okay, here's better alternatives if that's what you're looking for, which not all patients are looking for that. Or here's how to complement. And again, that's where we go with pork and plants. We think pork is a flavor driver, but we think pork is a flavor driver to get people to eat more plants. If you look at the Asian populations, true Asian populations over in Asian countries, pork is the most consumed protein in the world. And in Asian culture, it's dominant. And why do you think that is? Look at some of the global cuisines here. You have pork as an ingredient, right? You may have a bao bun or you may have a ramen bowl. Well, those things are not pork exclusive. Those things are pork as an ingredient, complementing with vegetables, fruits, and grains, what have you. And so I think we can take a piece from that book of, look, pork can fit into it. So let's stop the food fear and talk about inclusive adding to, and then that's going to help to improve our nutritional profiles.
I agree with you so much. And I think that approach can be so helpful, and especially using pork as a vehicle to getting people to maybe eat more plants, right? If we're trying to increase our fiber intake, Brussels sprouts alone, like you mentioned, they're a little bitter. They're a little funny tasting.
Right.
You throw some, caramelized bacon bits on it. That is delicious. And if that is a stepping stone to get patients to eat more fiber, I am all for it. I want to move into a really common reason for avoiding pork, and that's religious reasons. And so I'm just curious on how we navigate that with those specific patients. Are there any key talking points we need to be aware of, or maybe some alternative recommendations for some of those nutrients that we need to recommend?
It's a great question. It is a great question. And I think health professionals in general are starting to become more culturally competent now than they ever were. So I think this is a continuous learning process. So there are some cultures and religions who do not consume pork, and we respect that. Whether it's Judaism or Islam or it's some religions or some different cultures, I think it's your role as a clinician to respect that. There's a difference between a religious exemption from the diet and a confusion scare removed from the diet. And that's the role that we play, right? Is we respect religion, we respect that, but we also want to educate. And so I think it's an opportunity to learn from your patients. What are foods that are culturally relevant with them? And don't be surprised that pork is on there. So if we go in and we say, avoid pork and all red meat, for example, which unfortunately a lot of people are saying, should we rather say, what are your options? And do you want to choose lean options?
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you a question that actually came up on the poll that I had asked my audience. And this person had said that some of their patients with PCOS or endometriosis seem to have food sensitivities related to pork. So I'm just curious if there's any scientific evidence behind this link or if this is just more anecdotal.
I have never seen any particular data to this. And the challenge, like I said, is often red meat is all lumped together. So I think we're continuing to devote resources to truly understanding pork's role. But there was a paper by Dr. Chan and colleagues, and I'll put it in the reference list, looking at UK biobank data. And there was this premature ovarian syndrome insufficiency. It's a condition where you really lose normal ovarian function. And research found that dietary patterns with some fatty, oily fish and pork actually help to be protective against POI. So that's the only kind of women's health condition that I've seen data on. And I mean, there is so much literature out there, so I may have missed it, but I think that is something that we need to continue to invest in. And that is something that the National Pork Board is committed to. Like I said, we've spent over $1 million year over year investing in pork and human health nutrition. So I think in the next 5 years, we will start to gain a little bit more insight of pork specific in human health. And that's what it takes is the more research that we have, the more recommendations that are out there, the farmers are working hard to make sure that we're producing a high quality protein that meets the American people's wants and needs. The only other thing that I was going to say here is there is a condition called alpha-gal syndrome, which is a red meat allergy, and pork would be included in that, right? And so that is a condition that is influenced by a tick bite. The Lone Star tick actually would produce this alpha-gal syndrome. And it's something that we're working with a lot of federal partners to get this more on the radar of health professionals of if these patients or clients, whatever you call your audience, if they're coming in with some symptoms related to a red meat allergy, I highly encourage you to look up alpha-gal, and there is a testing biomarker for it. And that's something that we want to continue to explore and understand.
Oh, food science is so fascinating. So my last question, and this is a big one, almost always this is the topic that comes up for people who are anti-pork, is concerns about animal welfare and sustainability when it comes to pork. And so I think it'd be fascinating to know what are the industry standards and the responsible pork production that we can educate ourselves with and share with our patients.
Yeah, so I'm first going to start out by saying we have about 60,000 pig farmers here in the United States, right? And so I think knowing that is like, look, these pig farmers all over the country are working hard to produce a high quality protein for the American people and for international. We export about 30% of all pork production in the US is exported. And I am so proud to work on behalf of our 60,000 pig farmers because I think it's incredible. And we do not give farmers enough credit for the day in, day out work that they do to produce food that's going to be on your table. If it wasn't for those farmers, we would not have food in retail and it would not be on your table. So one thing, for over 35 years, we've had what's called our PQA program. It's our Pork Quality Assurance Plus program. And this is where people will take a science-based approach to animal care. So producers are required to be certified by these programs. So if you're working on a pig farm, you have to go through the PQA Plus program to learn about safety and animal welfare and human welfare on farms. These programs were certified by the USDA to comply with the International Standards Organization on Animal Care. So I encourage all of you to try and get on a farm one day. You'll be surprised. These farmers, the pigs are their livelihood. They love the pigs. They love farming. If they didn't, they wouldn't be in the business because it's not a super lucrative business all the time, right? So I think that's one. Two, when we think about the sustainability footprint, right? So over the past 55 years, pork producers have reduced land footprint by 75.9%, water footprint by 25.1%, and greenhouse gas footprint by 7.7% per pound of pork. Okay. The pig farmers, they want to pass their farms to the next generation. The only way they do that is by adopting sustainable practices, by caring for their animals and caring for their team of workers on their farm to be able to have a farm that sustains to the next generation, because that's very important. We have a lot of family generational farms here in the United States. Now, I'm going to provide a reference here. We actually have 2 papers out in the last year looking at pork and sustainability, because again, once you isolate pork from the red meat category, pork actually has a very favorable environmental footprint. It is not a ruminant animal. So when we think about sustainable food choices, pork fits in sustainable dietary patterns. It's a red meat and it has some nutritional profiles of red meat, but it's white meat in some ways in terms of nutritional profile and some of the economics and the environment. And so I think one of our roles as the National Pork Board is going out and doing research with academics all over the country. We don't do the research in-house. Do the research, fund the research, and then talk about the science. Talk about evidence-based translation to health professionals. And I want to debunk myths so people feel comfortable in talking about pork. Whether it's for everyone or not, that's up to you as a clinician. I'm not going to tell you that. But I want people to have choice because that's what consumers are looking for. And they're looking for our health professionals to give them choice, to give them options. And that's what we can do.
I really like your approach to education, and that really aligns with my mission and goal with the podcast is give patients options, educate based on what the science shows, and then let them choose. And that is the best approach to medicine and healthcare at large. So thank you so much for sharing all this information. I learned so much about pork. So if other people want to learn about pork, where should we direct them and what resources would you provide us with?
Yeah, so our Pork and Partners community has a monthly newsletter, which is incredible. You get to learn a lot of the research, but then a lot of application. We'll provide you with some really cool like air fryer recipes or some really fun recipes that you can talk about with your clients. We also have a number of free continuing education webinars, and we have one coming up this summer, really looking at infant feeding and animal source foods. We have a lot of exclusive events. So if you're going to nutrition related conferences or nutrition science conferences, reach out to us. I mean, we would love to get connected with you and meet you in real life and talk about your stories and how we can better provide resources. And then lastly, we do have a number of free resources, whether you're looking at, comparing ground meats of what I talked about earlier. We have all the lean cuts. We have pork and plants. We have our really fun World of Flavor wheel, and it talks about pork and plants in traditional dishes all over the world, and pork is there. So we have lots of great resources. So I hope you join our Pork and Partners community. It's for all health professionals or really anyone interested in content to learn more about pork nutrition. They can sign up at Pork and Partners. You can just Google it and I'll make sure I provide the link.
All of the resources she had mentioned will be down in the show notes below. So if you want to dive deep into pork and really educate yourself, you will have plenty of things to dive into. Kristen, thank you so much for the gift of your time today and sharing all this information about the wonderful world of pork.
Thanks, Colleen. Appreciate it.
Didn't I tell you you'd end today with a whole new perspective about pork? Well, if you have any questions or you want to dig deeper into anything that we talked about, do not hesitate to shoot me an email at colleen@examroomnutrition.com. I always love hearing from you. And if you loved this episode, feel free to share it with a colleague. This helps spread the word about this podcast. And don't forget to check the show notes for a ton of helpful resources from Kristen, including recipes, research, and quick reference guides for your next patient conversation. Well, as always, let's continue making our patients healthier, one exam room at a time. I'll see you next time.